The tears came without warning. Bob Dylan sat in a dimly lit backstage room at the Warfield Theater, November 1979, wearing a silver cross that gleamed against his dark shirt. Across from him, Rolling Stone journalist Paul Williams pressed trembling fingers to his face, overwhelmed by what he was hearing. The air smelled of cigarette smoke and stale coffee. For 20 minutes, Dylan had been speaking with an intensity Williams had never witnessed. "I saw Jesus," Dylan said, leaning forward. "Not in a dream. I saw him with my own eyes. And everything I thought I knew about life just vanished. Because once you've seen the face of God, nothing else matters." Williams wiped his eyes, unable to maintain composure. He'd expected cryptic Dylan speak. Instead, he was witnessing testimony, raw, unfiltered, delivered with passion that had shattered Dylan's identity and rebuilt it from scratch. "My manager thinks I've lost my mind," Dylan continued, the cross swaying. "Half my fans walk out of shows. Critics are calling me a fraud. But I can't go back to singing those old songs like they still mean something. They don't. Not after you've been touched by Jesus Christ." How did Bob Dylan, Jewish boy from Minnesota, voice of secular rebellion, end up in this room wearing a cross and making a journalist weep? The answer begins 40 years earlier, May 24th, 1941. Robert Allen Zimmerman was born into a Jewish family in Duluth, Minnesota. His grandparents had fled pogroms in Eastern Europe, carrying their faith across an ocean. Young Bobby grew up in Hibbing, a small iron mining town on Minnesota's Mesabi Range, where winter lasted 8 months and being Jewish meant being different. His mother Beatty kept a kosher kitchen. His father Abe took him to synagogue every Sabbath. Bobby attended Hebrew school after regular classes, learning Torah, while his Christian classmates went home to play. On his 13th birthday in 1954, Bobby stood before the congregation and read from the Torah, becoming a bar mitzvah. He wore a tallit his grandfather had brought from the old country. He chanted in Hebrew. His grandmother wept with pride. But Bobby Zimmerman was already dreaming of escape, not from Judaism itself, but from the otherness it represented. He wanted to be unburdened by ancient identity, free to reinvent himself completely. When Bobby Zimmerman became Bob Dylan in 1961, that reinvention was total. He invented an entire mythology that erased Robert Zimmerman. The folk music world wanted universal truths. Dylan gave them "Blowin' in the Wind" and "The Times They Are A-Changin'," anthems that never mentioned God or the Jewish boy who remembered his grandmother's Sabbath candles. That buried identity would make his 1979 conversion to Christianity even more shocking. A betrayal not just of secular fans, but of ancestors who had died rather than abandon their faith. By 1977, Bob Dylan had everything: fame that made him unable to walk down streets, money beyond measure, artistic respect that put him in conversations with poets and presidents, and underneath it all, a hollow emptiness that grew larger with each passing year. His marriage to Sarah Lowndes was disintegrating after 11 years and 5 children. The divorce became final in June 1977, taking with it the last anchor to normal life. Dylan threw himself into touring, 114 shows that year alone, performing like a man running from something that followed him everywhere. "I was in a lot of trouble," Dylan later said, and for once there was no cryptic double meaning. At 41, divorced and exhausted, Dylan felt directionless in a way success couldn't fix. The protest songs felt like someone else's words. The rock persona felt like a tired costume. He'd spent 20 years running from Robert Zimmerman, and now he'd run so far he couldn't find his way back. That void made him vulnerable, and vulnerability can open you to either destruction or grace. In Dylan's case, it opened him to both. Her name was Mary Alice Artez, 26 years old, backup singer, with a voice that could make gospel music sound like conversation with heaven. She was born-again Christian who carried her faith with unself-conscious certainty. Dylan met her in early 1979 during recording sessions. He was drawn to her voice first, that pure, soaring quality that gospel singers have when they're not just performing, but testifying. Then he was drawn to her complete comfort with herself, a groundedness that seemed impossible in the chaos of the music world. They started dating, but Alice didn't do anything casually when it came to faith. She talked about Jesus the way Dylan talked about music, with passion and conviction. She prayed before meals in restaurants. She carried a Bible in her purse. She invited Dylan to church at the Vineyard Fellowship in Los Angeles. Dylan went to humor her. But something about Vineyard Fellowship was different. Pastor Larry Myers didn't shout about hellfire. He talked about Jesus as if describing a friend, someone real and genuinely interested in messy, complicated lives. Dylan kept going back, week after week through early 1979, listening to Pastor Myers talk about grace and redemption, that no one was too far gone to be saved, that faith wasn't about perfection, it was about surrender. One night in May 1979, Dylan stayed after service to talk with Pastor Myers. They spoke for hours about faith and doubt. "I've been searching my whole life," Dylan admitted, "but there's still this void." "You've been searching for God," Pastor Myers replied. "You just didn't realize it." That night, according to Dylan's later testimony, something happened. A vision, an experience that changed him fundamentally. 2 weeks later, Bob Dylan was baptized in someone's backyard swimming pool in Los Angeles. The secular icon who had defined a generation's rebellion knelt in the water and accepted Jesus Christ as his personal savior. His fans had no idea, but they were about to find out. 3 days after his baptism, Dylan sat down for what was supposed to be a routine interview. Instead, it became testimony that would change everything. Paul Williams from Rolling Stone arrived expecting standard Dylan evasiveness. Instead, Dylan walked in wearing a large silver Christian cross that caught the light with every movement. Williams stared at it. Dylan noticed. "I know," Dylan said, sitting down. "Everyone's going to want to ask about this, so I might as well start explaining." "Are you Christian now?" Williams asked carefully. "I'm saved," Dylan said with conviction. "I was blind and now I see. All those cliches, they're all true when they actually happen to you." Williams pulled out his recorder, but Dylan waved it away. "No, turn that off. You need to just listen, not as a journalist, as a human being." For the next hour, Dylan talked with honesty Williams had never heard from him. He talked about the emptiness of previous years, the divorce that left him hollow, the endless searching for something to fill the void. Drugs, sex, music, acclaim, and finding that nothing worked. Then he talked about the vision. "I was alone in my house," Dylan said, leaning forward. "Late at night, sitting in the dark, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt, and suddenly I wasn't alone anymore. I felt this presence, and I saw him, Jesus, standing there like he'd been waiting for me to finally notice him." "You saw him?" Williams asked. "Like a hallucination?" "I saw him," Dylan repeated firmly, "as real as you're sitting across from me. And he spoke to me. He said, 'Follow me.' And I knew with absolute certainty that everything in my life had been leading to that moment." Dylan touched the cross, his hand shaking slightly. "I went to church the next morning. Pastor Myers said, 'Bob, you've been called.' So I got baptized. And when I came up out of that water, I was a different person. The old Bob Dylan, the one who wrote 'Blowin' in the Wind,' he died in that water. This is who came out." The conviction in his voice was overwhelming. Williams felt something break open in his chest, recognition of absolute certainty. This wasn't Bob Dylan, the performer, playing another role. This was a man who genuinely believed he'd encountered God. "What about your old music? Your fans?" Dylan's expression hardened. "Those songs came from searching, from questions. Now I have answers. The answer is Jesus Christ. Everything else, fame, success, it's meaningless compared to salvation of your soul." Williams felt tears forming, not because he believed, but because of what Dylan was willing to sacrifice. His career, his legacy, his entire identity. "I'm scared for you," Williams admitted. "I'm scared of what this will do to your career." Dylan smiled sadly. "My career doesn't matter. 20 years from now, people won't remember whether Bob Dylan had hit records. They'll remember whether Bob Dylan served God, and I've made my choice." That's when Williams started crying in earnest. Quiet tears from witnessing someone willing to risk everything for conviction. Dylan reached across and gripped his shoulder. "I know it's hard to understand," Dylan said quietly. "All I know is that Jesus is real. He touched my life. And once you know that, you can't unknow it." Williams wiped his eyes. Can I write about this? You should write about it, Dylan said firmly. I'm not hiding anymore. I found Jesus Christ and I'm going to tell everyone who'll listen. He paused. And even those who won't. August 1979. Slow Train Coming hit record stores like a grenade. The album cover showed a cross. The first track, Gotta Serve Somebody, was pure gospel, a declaration that everyone serves someone. Might be the devil or might be the Lord. Then Dylan started giving interviews. Jesus put his hand on me, he told journalists. It was physical. I felt my whole body tremble. The music world reacted with shock and anger. Bob Dylan, voice of secular rebellion, had joined America's most conservative religious movement. He'd become an evangelical Christian. November 1st, 1979, the Warfield Theater in San Francisco, opening night of what would become one of the most controversial tours in rock history. 2,000 fans packed the venue expecting hits. Instead, Dylan walked on stage wearing that silver cross and played 2 hours of nothing but gospel material. Songs about Jesus, salvation, end times. Not a single classic hit. Between songs, he preached like an evangelist. How many people here believe in Jesus Christ? Dylan asked the stunned audience. Because that's the only question that matters. Everything else is just noise. People walked out, loudly, angrily, shouting betrayal. Play Blowin' in the Wind, someone shouted from the balcony. Dylan looked up, expression hardening. That song's from the past. I don't sing it anymore. Those songs were asking questions. Now I have the answer. The answer is Jesus Christ. Boos erupted from sections of the audience. Dylan stood there and took it, the cross gleaming under stage lights. You can boo if you want, he said, but it won't change the truth. Jesus Christ is Lord, and one day every knee will bow and every tongue will confess it. The tour continued for 14 shows at the Warfield, then moved to other cities. Same reaction everywhere. Confusion, anger, walkouts. Rolling Stone published Dylan's God-awful gospel. But Dylan didn't waver. Night after night, only gospel. Night after night, wearing that cross and preaching. The anger wasn't just about music. It was about identity and betrayal. For 20 years, Dylan had been the voice of people who questioned authority and rejected mainstream religion. Now he was telling them the only path was Jesus Christ, that all their searching had been pointless because the answer was in the Bible. Joan Baez, Dylan's former girlfriend from the folk days, was asked about his conversion in 1980. She chose her words carefully. Bob has always been searching. I just wish he'd found something that didn't require him to reject everything he was. Allen Ginsberg was more direct. It's like watching someone you love join a cult. Record sales plummeted. Saved, his second gospel album released in 1980, sold poorly compared to any Dylan album in the previous 15 years. Concert attendance dropped dramatically. Radio stations stopped playing his new material. Dylan didn't care. I'd rather have Jesus than silver or gold, he said in one interview. What good is success if you lose your soul? He continued recording gospel albums, continued performing only Christian material through 1980 and 1981, continued wearing the cross everywhere, continued attending Bible study with the fervor of a new convert. But even as Dylan spoke with conviction, something was beginning to shift. By 1983, something had changed. Dylan still performed gospel material, but old songs had crept back into set lists. The preaching disappeared. The cross went under his shirt. He never announced a change, just gradually moved away from evangelical certainty. His 1983 album, Infidels, contained spiritual themes but wasn't explicitly Christian. He started attending Jewish services again. He celebrated his son's bar mitzvah. But he also continued writing songs with Christian themes. He never denounced his conversion. When interviewers asked what changed, Dylan gave evasive answers. My faith is between me and God. Or, that's personal. The truth was complicated. Dylan had genuinely encountered something meaningful in Christianity, but he'd discovered that no single religious identity could contain him. The Jewish boy from Minnesota and the born-again Christian weren't separate people. They were both Dylan. More than 40 years later, the impact becomes clearer even if its meaning remains mysterious. The gospel period didn't destroy Dylan's career. Gotta Serve Somebody won a Grammy. The albums gained respect for musical sophistication and emotional honesty. Dylan's willingness to risk everything for faith reinforced the authenticity that had always defined him. The fans who walked out of those 1979 concerts mostly came back. Not all of them, but enough. They learned to see the gospel period as another chapter in Dylan's evolution. The controversy faded into Dylan's mythology. Today, Dylan rarely discusses faith publicly. He performs songs from all periods, gospel mixed with folk and rock. He wears the cross sometimes, a Star of David other times, neither on some occasions. The Bob Dylan who knelt in a swimming pool and accepted Jesus Christ in 1979 still exists inside the Dylan performing today. But so does the Jewish boy from Minnesota, and the folk hero, and the rock rebel. Maybe that's the real lesson of Dylan's gospel period. Identity isn't fixed. Faith isn't simple. Transformation doesn't mean abandoning everything. It means adding complexity to an already complicated self. His fans never fully forgave him because they never understood what to forgive. Dylan didn't betray anyone in 1979. He was being Dylan, following instincts, searching for truth, willing to risk everything for authenticity. The cross around his neck during those gospel years wasn't a costume or publicity stunt. It was real, but so was everything before and after. Dylan contained multitudes, and his gospel period was just one of those multitudes demanding its moment before fading back into the whole. Bob Dylan found Jesus in 1979. What he did with that discovery remains as mysterious as the man himself. Because a prophet who can be fully understood isn't a prophet anymore. He's just another celebrity with opinions. And whatever else Bob Dylan has been across his long, strange career, he's never been just another anything. If this story of faith and transformation moved you, subscribe to discover more untold moments from music history. Have you ever risked everything for something you believed in? Share your story in the comments.